It was one of those evenings when the house felt too quiet, too empty. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my legs, half watching some reality show I couldn't care less about. Ethan had said it was just a one-night trip. A quick meeting, nothing big. But hours had passed, and my phone stayed silent. The clock ticked louder than the TV. That familiar ache began in my chest, the one that whispers, "Something isn't right." I picked up my phone, trying to sound casual even though my hands were clammy. "Come on, pick up, Ethan," I muttered with a little laugh that didn't sound like me. 2 rings, and then, "Hello?" But it wasn't him. It was a woman, calm, soft, and completely unfamiliar. My heart stumbled. Who's this?" "I'm trying to reach Ethan Miller." "Oh, he's in the shower right now. Who's speaking?" she said, cheerful, as if it were nothing. My stomach turned to ice. "His wife," I managed to say, though my voice trembled. There was a sharp inhale, a beat of silence, and then the line went dead. I just sat there, phone in hand, staring at the wall while the words echoed in my head. "He's in the shower." I just sat there, frozen. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the couch beside me, still glowing like some kind of cruel reminder. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to convince myself I'd misheard, that maybe it was a hotel clerk or some assistant. But her voice, it wasn't professional. It was intimate, relaxed, like she belonged there. And that's what terrified me the most. I called back, desperate for logic, for anything that could make this feel less real. But the call went straight to voicemail. Once, twice, 3 times. My fingers shook so badly I almost dropped the phone again. I stared at our wedding photo on the wall, his arm around me, both of us smiling like we'd figured life out. I used to believe in that picture. Now, it just looked like a lie framed in wood. The room felt smaller, heavier. Every second dragged like wet cement. I kept asking myself, why would another woman be there? Why answer his phone? And then, like a punch to the gut, it hit me. The simplest, most devastating answer. He wasn't alone. The man I trusted, the man I waited for every night, was in a shower with someone else, and I just heard her voice. I stood up and started pacing, the floor creaking under my bare feet. The air felt thick, almost hard to breathe. I kept glancing at the phone like it owed me an explanation, like it might suddenly light up and make this all disappear. But deep down, I knew. That voice, that calm sweetness, it didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone who thought she had him. And maybe, just maybe, she did. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, though my throat was too tight to swallow. My reflection in the window startled me. Eyes red, lips trembling, a woman I barely recognized. "Pull yourself together," I whispered, but my voice cracked halfway through. I wasn't ready to cry. Not yet. Tears would mean acceptance, and I wasn't there. Not tonight. So I sat back down on the couch, clutching the phone in silence, replaying every word, every lie, every "I love you" that suddenly felt rehearsed. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was rearranging itself into something colder, sharper. And though I didn't know it yet, that single call wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of my revenge. Morning came, but it felt like the night had never ended. I didn't sleep, not really. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat and wondering how everything could change in one phone call. The sun slipped through the blinds, painting stripes across the room, but even the light felt intrusive. It was as if the world dared me to act normal when I was falling apart inside. I got up, made coffee I couldn't taste, and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was a coworker, a friend, Anyone but what my gut was screaming she was. But the thing about instincts, they don't lie. They just wait for you to catch up. And mine was already miles ahead, whispering the truth I wasn't ready to hear. Still, I told myself to breathe, to wait, to let him call first. I needed to hear his voice, to see if guilt had crept into his tone. I rehearsed what I'd say if he lied again, but my heart wouldn't settle. Every sound in the house made me flinch, the hum of the fridge, the buzz of my phone that wasn't him. I'd never felt so aware of silence before. An hour passed, then another. I kept checking my phone, even when I knew I hadn't heard it ring. The waiting was torture. Each minute stretched thin, like it was daring me to break first. I tried to distract myself by folding laundry, wiping the counters, anything to keep my hands busy. But no amount of cleaning could scrub away the image of her answering my husband's phone. The thought played on a loop, cruel and relentless. When he finally called, I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen, heart racing, mind spinning. I answered anyway, my voice steady, though my body felt like it was made of glass. "Hey, babe," he said, casual, easy. "Sorry, bad signal earlier. Everything okay?" His tone was smooth, too smooth. That's when I knew. Guilt has a sound. You just have to be close enough to hear it. "Who answered your phone, Ethan?" I asked. Silence. Then confusion. Too practiced to be real. "What? No one. Maybe housekeeping?" he said, with a nervous laugh that made my stomach turn. "Housekeeping doesn't call people babe," I shot back. The pause that followed said everything words couldn't. In that moment, the space between us became something I couldn't cross again. He stammered, trying to collect himself, but every word only deepened the pit in my stomach. "You're overreacting, Claire. I told you. It's just work." His voice was firm now, defensive, almost offended. That tone, the one men use when they know they're guilty but can't stand being caught. I could practically hear his pulse quicken through the phone. He was building walls with excuses, but I'd already seen through the cracks. "Then I guess work now wears perfume and answers your phone," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. For a moment, there was silence. Pure, suffocating silence. Then I hung up before he could respond. My hand trembled, but not from fear anymore. From clarity. The kind that burns through confusion and leaves only resolve. Somewhere between the betrayal and the dial tone, my heartbreak began to harden into something else. I stood there, looking out the window as dusk began to swallow the light. The city carried on as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the woman who begged for answers anymore. I was the one preparing to find them. And if Ethan thought I'd just cry and move on, he was about to learn exactly who he married. By morning, the fog of disbelief had lifted, and what remained was something far steadier: purpose. I woke up early, made a pot of coffee I didn't even touch, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The ache in my chest had cooled into resolve. I wasn't going to scream or cry or beg for truth. I was going to find it myself. I'd spent years managing his schedules, his expenses, his so-called business trips. Now, that attention to detail was going to serve me. I called the hotel first, masking my voice in professionalism. "Good afternoon. This is Angela from Blue Line Corporation. Could I confirm Mr. Ethan Miller's check-in details?" My tone was calm. Too calm. The kind that hides a storm beneath it. The receptionist didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. Suite 302. Checked in last night, along with Ms. Ava Green." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. There it was. The name that would burn itself into my memory. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the phone like it had just confessed to a crime. Ava Green. A name that sounded almost poetic. Soft vowels, gentle rhythm. too pretty for what it represented. I whispered it once under my breath, letting it sink in. "Ava, you'll remember me," I said quietly. And I meant it, because something deep inside me had clicked into place, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared. I was awake. Once I had her name, everything became clearer, like the world had suddenly shifted into focus. I wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. I was tracing footsteps, and Ethan had left plenty. I opened our shared bank account on my laptop and started scrolling. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, little things he thought I'd never notice. I took screenshots of everything, each one a tiny fracture in the perfect life he'd tried to paint for me. Betrayal has its own kind of math, and I was finally learning to count. Then I remembered his work laptop. He'd left it at home, as usual, too confident, too careless. I opened it, half expecting to find nothing, half hoping I was wrong. But there it was, a string of emails, playful, intimate, signed with A. She wasn't just some fling. She was a secret he'd built into his daily routine. That realization didn't hurt. It fueled me. The tears I'd fought the night before turned to fuel for the fire that was now quietly spreading inside me. By the time the sun began to dip, I had everything I needed. Screenshots, statements, messages, all neatly saved and backed up. My hands didn't shake anymore. My breath was steady. Revenge, I realized, isn't a sudden impulse. It's a slow, deliberate art form. And I wasn't just the woman he betrayed. I was the one who would decide what came next. That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. But it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like Command Central. My laptop glowed in the dim light, the cursor blinking like a pulse. I scrolled through folders, credit card portals, and travel receipts, each click cutting a little deeper into what used to be my marriage. Funny thing is, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But tears are for victims, and I wasn't one anymore. Not after what I'd seen. I wrote his name and hers side by side on a notepad. Ethan Miller, Ava Green. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Two people who thought they were untouchable. Two people who had underestimated the woman who knew him best. The woman who'd built his world and was now quietly preparing to take it apart piece by piece. I didn't need to yell or break things. I just needed to move carefully, like a chess player about to end the game. By midnight, I had a plan. Simple, precise. I'd wait until he came home, look him in the eye, and let him think he'd gotten away with it. I wanted to see the lie form on his lips before I took it all away. The power, the comfort, the illusion. I closed the laptop, exhaled slowly, and whispered to myself, tomorrow, he learns who he married. Then, for the first time since that call, I actually slept. The next evening, I heard his car pull into the driveway. That familiar engine sound, the one that used to make me smile, now felt like a warning bell. I stood in the kitchen, calm, collected, a cup of tea warming my hands. When the front door opened, I didn't move. I just listened. His footsteps, his keys hitting the counter, his voice calling my name like nothing had happened. Claire? Honey? The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. He walked in holding flowers, roses, of course, the classic guilt bouquet. Hey, he said, smiling like he could charm his way back into my world. I gestured to the chair across from me, my tone steady. Sit. He hesitated, thrown off by my calmness. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Good. He wasn't used to silence from me. He was used to softness. But tonight, I was carved from stone. How was the trip? I asked, keeping my voice even. He grinned, relieved, thinking the storm had passed. Busy, you know how it is. I nodded slowly. And Ava? Was she busy too? His smile faltered, like a candle catching a gust. The color drained from his face. What? he asked, too quickly. I leaned forward, letting each word land with precision. Suite 302, 2 guests, 1 wife at home. He blinked fast, his lips parting like he might still try to lie his way out. Claire, But I cut him off. Don't bother, I said, sliding my phone across the table. On the screen, a list of transactions glowed under the kitchen light. Hotel bills, dinners, jewelry. You weren't careful, Ethan. You left breadcrumbs everywhere. He stared at the evidence, his face a perfect mix of panic and disbelief. It was almost artistic, watching the realization set in. Claire, please, he finally said, voice cracking just enough to sound human again. It didn't mean anything. I tilted my head, studying him like a stranger. Neither do you, I replied softly. That line hung between us, heavy and final. For once, he didn't have a comeback, no smooth excuse to hide behind. Just the shallow sound of his breathing, and the thud of his own downfall echoing in the quiet. Then I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a single envelope. Divorce papers. Already filled out, neatly signed on my end. I placed them in front of him and folded my hands. You can sign these tonight, I said, or tomorrow morning. Either way, they'll be filed. He looked up at me, eyes glassy, searching for mercy that no longer lived here. I didn't flinch. I'd already buried it. He stared at the papers like they were written in another language. You can't just end everything over one mistake, he said, voice rising, desperate to sound righteous. I almost pitied him. Almost. One mistake? I repeated, leaning back in my chair. You ended this when she answered your phone. His mouth opened, but no words came. For once, Ethan Miller, the man who always had something clever to say, was speechless. I watched him crumble in real time, the mask slipping piece by piece. It was strange, almost fascinating. The same man who once held my heart now looked small, frightened, hollow. He whispered, "You'll regret this." I smiled, slow and steady. Doubt it, I said, sliding another paper toward him. That's a list of every transaction tied to your corporate card. You might want to call HR before they call you. His eyes widened as the truth hit. His affair wasn't just personal, it was professional suicide. He stood up suddenly, pacing, running a hand through his hair like a trapped animal. But I stayed seated, calm as ever, my tea still warm in front of me. I'd imagined this confrontation 100 times, but reality felt cleaner, sharper. I didn't need to yell or throw things. My silence spoke louder than rage ever could. And as he stood there, unraveling in his own lies, I realized revenge didn't need noise. It only needed truth. He sank into the chair across from me, shoulders slumped, eyes darting between the papers and my face. You can't just throw it all away, Claire, he said, voice trembling. We built a life together. I met his gaze, steady and unshaken. You built a lie, Ethan. I just stopped living in it. The words came out smoother than I expected, almost gentle. But beneath that calm tone was the kind of fury that no longer burned. It froze, and that's what scared him most. He tried to recover, his voice growing louder. You're acting crazy, over one mistake? That word again. Mistake. As if her voice on the phone had been an accident. As if every receipt, every message, every lie had simply fallen out of his pocket by chance. You ended this the moment she answered, I said, my voice low but sharp. You handed her the phone and handed me the truth. He laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound. You'll regret this, Claire. You'll end up alone. I tilted my head, almost curious. Maybe, I said softly, but at least I'll be honest with myself. He didn't realize yet that regret had already switched sides. I wasn't the one drowning anymore. He was. And I wasn't about to throw him a lifeline. He stared at me, realizing that for the first time his words had no power. I wasn't bending, begging, or breaking. I was unmoved. "You'll regret this," he repeated, but it sounded weaker now, more like a habit than a threat. I reached for my purse and stood up slowly, taking my time, letting the silence stretch between us. "I already transferred my half of our savings to my account," I said calmly. "The rest? You might want to explain to your boss why your mistress's name keeps showing up on your corporate expenses." He blinked, trying to process it, his voice cracking. "You wouldn't?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and almost smiled. "I already did." Watching the color drain from his face was almost poetic. Years of deceit collapsing in seconds. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. Some victories are quieter. They don't scream, they whisper, "Checkmate." He tried to follow me as I walked toward the door, still pleading, still clinging to the illusion of control. But that doorframe felt like a finish line I'd been crawling toward for months. I paused, hand on the knob, and looked back at him one last time. His eyes were wet, desperate, small. "Next time you want to play house," I said, my voice steady, "make sure your little girlfriend doesn't answer the phone." Then I opened the door and left him to the silence he'd earned. Outside, the night air hit my face like a baptism. Cool, cleansing. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. The door closing behind me sounded less like an ending and more like release. For years, I'd measured my worth by his affection, his approval, his attention. But as I walked to my car, I realized something beautiful. I didn't need any of it anymore. Freedom has a sound, and it's quiet. I drove aimlessly for a while, past the coffee shop we used to visit, past the park where he'd first kissed me. Those memories used to ache. Now they just existed, like postcards from a life that no longer fit. My hands were steady on the wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked alive. There was grief, yes, but underneath it, there was something new. Strength. By the time I reached the coast, the sky was beginning to lighten. I parked, rolled down the window, and breathed in the salty air. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just sat there, listening to the waves and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a call, a text, or an apology. I was finally at peace with the silence, and ready for what came next. Months later, I found myself at a small cafe by the beach, the kind of place where the ocean hums in the background and time seems to move slower. I sat by the window with my journal open, the pages filled with fragments of the woman I used to be, and glimpses of the one I was becoming. The waiter brought me a cup of coffee, smiling like he'd seen me 100 times before. "You come here often," he said. I smiled back. "Every weekend. It's my peace ritual." It's funny. How routine can heal you. The sound of spoons clinking against porcelain, the warmth of the cup in my hands, the smell of sea salt and roasted beans. I used to crave drama, closure, answers. Now I craved quiet. I didn't want to talk about him anymore. I didn't need to. My silence said more than my anger ever could. I'd stopped replaying the night of the call. It no longer defined me. My phone buzzed against the table, pulling me from my thoughts. An unknown number. The message preview lit up the screen. "I miss you. Please talk to me. E." I stared at it for a second, then laughed softly. One of those deep, unguarded laughs that come from the gut. I deleted the message without replying and looked out toward the water. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sea breeze brush against my skin. It carried no memories of him anymore, only the scent of salt, the whisper of waves, and the faint laughter of strangers nearby. Life had moved on, and so had I. There was no bitterness left, no anger hiding in the corners of my heart, just space, space for peace, for growth, for me. It's strange how healing doesn't announce itself. One day you simply realize you're no longer bleeding. I picked up my pen and wrote a single line in my journal. Revenge isn't about hurting them. It's about remembering who you are without them. I paused, rereading it, feeling its truth settle deep inside me. For months, I'd been rebuilding, not the marriage, not the illusion, but the woman beneath it all. I was learning to love my own company again, to trust my instincts, to savor the quiet. The same silence that once broke me now felt like home. As I finished my coffee, I looked around the cafe, couples chatting, children laughing, waves crashing just beyond the patio. It didn't sting anymore to see love in other people's eyes. If anything, it reminded me of what I was capable of giving again, someday, when it felt right. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about owning it and walking forward anyway. I lingered at the table a little longer, watching the horizon fade into gold. The world looked softer now, like it had forgiven me for the chaos I'd carried. I wasn't the woman who waited by the phone anymore. I wasn't the one pacing, wondering, breaking. I was the one choosing. Every sip of coffee, every breath of sea air, every word I wrote was a small rebellion against the woman I used to be, and a love letter to the one I'd become. The waiter came by again, asking if I wanted another cup. I smiled and shook my head. No, thank you. I've had just enough. He grinned and walked away, and I couldn't help but think how true that felt in more ways than one. Enough heartbreak, enough pretending, enough silence filled with someone else's lies. What remained was mine, my voice, my peace, my story. I closed my journal, slid it into my bag, and stood to leave. As I walked out, the sun caught the water just right, and for a second, everything shimmered. I whispered to myself, half smiling, he lost a wife. I found myself. And just like that, the tide came in, steady, endless, forgiving. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already won.